Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com. On this episode, we are talking Disney. That's right. I'm dissecting the magic with Kashif Raza of 3 Links and Joe McIntyre of 1248. Join in as we all nerd out on the operation side of Disney World and how we are taking some of what we saw on our trips there into the warehouse. Stay tuned to hear this conversation, originally broadcast live on LinkedIn.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
All right, we are live here with Joe and Kashif, and we're going to talk about Disney World today. Pretty interesting. I think we've all three been to Disney World in the past couple months here. So, Joe, why don't you just kind of give us a little intro about yourself and what you do?
Joe McIntyre. I started 1248, which is a company that focuses on helping fulfillment providers, operators in general, on taking their business from where they are now to where they want to get it through operations and the non-sexy parts of the warehouse, like administrative functions, right?
It's all
people,
sexy. What are you talking
back
about?
office. Well, I think it's all sexy, but not everyone does, right? Some people love the ops. Some people love the business. I try to help bridge the gap between both. So that's where my focus has been. And then I also spent some time with you, Kevin, helping out with the new warehouse and contributing there. And I owe you some articles, but they're coming.
Definitely. We got an article we'll be putting up from you this week as well. So, and Kashif, thanks for joining us today as well for this chat on Disney World. I know you were recently there, but give us a little bit of intro for yourself too.
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kashif. I like to call myself chief troublemaker at 3 Links. We started as a fulfillment 3PL operation in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is where I call home even today. And along the way, we decided to build the warehouse management system to make our life easy and our customers' life easy. So I, like Kevin, believe that warehouses are definitely sexy. And
Oh yeah.
we're learning by being in the trenches and using our technology to support the operations team. And more recently, we've been licensing that way of doing business with technology, SOPs, and values, all packaged together to different 3PLs that are looking to grow and drink the Kool-Aid with us and help us get better.
Good tasting Kool-Aid, I'm sure. So, chief troublemaker. I'm curious. Why do you call yourself that? You like to try and break stuff, or what are you doing?
Oh yes. I have a 2 out of 10 average on good ideas, so 8 ideas are bad, and my ops teams always tells me, 2 is better than the 8 ideas I have. But we always like to test ideas and theories on ourselves first in the Allentown market. Before we license that idea or that feature is rolled out to everybody, we drink our own medicine first. And I think that's what's made us different, in that we have built the technology to take care of ourselves and our operations first. And once our ops team is happy with it, then we roll it out as a part of the platform. So that's why Allentown is where all the trouble is caused.
All right, well, that's good to hear. And I think, having more ideas than no ideas, whether they're bad or good, is a good thing, I would say. And I think we could all agree here, as ops folks, we're always kind of looking for inspiration on ideas and potential new solutions or things to do to better improve processes, whether they're sexy or unsexy there, to be able to do those things. And I think, as we've probably all seen here, that, Disney World is a great source of inspiration. I think I remember Joe posting something a few months ago about his trip to Disney World. And then I know, Kasha, if you recently posted, I think last week too. And I was there last week as well. So I'm curious, from both of you, as we look at like a trip to Disney World, obviously it's daunting. And I think we all have kids that we took there. So when you look at it from like a planning perspective, does kind of your ops mind like come into play? Like, how do I plan this? How do I navigate this? Like, what would you kind of relate that to in the ops world?
Yeah. I should have put my ops mind to work before that was a lesson learned as we are walking through the airport in Orlando and realized that on this first trip to Disney with our 3-year-old daughter, we just didn't bring a stroller. So, having a checklist and planning beforehand would have been good. But, the other part too was the planning is important because you don't want to waste time. Right. And you don't want to waste resources and you don't want to waste what's going on. Like the reality of Disney is it's a great experience and a great place to go and you make wonderful memories there, but it's not cheap to do. And so you want to maximize what's going on. And if you have a family that is into different things, different like rides versus shows versus whatever, it can be difficult to execute what you need to execute, not to make a fun trip sound businessy, to get that really fun outcome. So we went into it, I guess, pre-planning before we left our house. Not great for getting the stroller, but when we got there, like really understanding, okay, what do we care about? What do we want to make sure we see for sure? What are the things we're willing to, spend a little more on, like fast pass or whatever, to make that happen? My wife actually did a better job of planning than I did. We went at a very low time of the year, like the first week in November. So we avoided a lot of the peak things that were happening. So we benefited by not having to plan too much. But I would say being there and just going through it before you even talk about how Disney does it, right? Like I would say people who are operationally focused probably have a better time. It reinforced the plan, act, evaluate, replan, and act again definitely came into play for us after each day of the park.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Kasha?
So let me first say that this was a trip 10 years in the making.
Okay.
And I confess I did not buy a single Disney or Universal book or plan or read or research or did anything. I knew I had a rough idea what sort of rides we wanted to do. We're big Harry Potter fans in our family, so we knew we were going to hit all of those rides maybe more than once. But beyond that, it was an interesting trip. So like any forward-thinking ops executive, I just booked the trip without thinking. We thanks to my wife, we made sure our luggage was weighed and everything was there. So we just ran into different types of problems. We did Universal first. So I had an interesting perspective on Disney, having been in the Universal app for 4 days, and then we were moving to Disney. But our fun started right from the time we were supposed to pick up the rental car. And we were in the spring break fever in Orlando, and finding a minivan was impossible. But being the ops executive that I am, I found one 20 miles north, took an Uber there, had him sweet talk the guy into crediting me the money, right, for the Uber, and that worked great. But I think when life presents you with lemons, ops folks just make lemonade. So not only did we do research literally on the bus ride from Magic Kingdom to Animal Kingdom, etc. I like to talk to people. So what I did was I started to crowdsource information on the best rides. So the person to my left, 2 people on the left, 2 people on the right, and in front, I asked them, how's your day going? What are some of the best rides? Which parks have you been to? Which parks are you going to go to? And within about 5 minutes or 10 minutes of that bus ride, I had a very good idea of the rides that we wanted to look at. So that helped us out big time. We also heard things like get the Genie Pass and get the pass late at night or early in the morning, and you book the rides or don't. So I would love to take credit for that, but I have to mention my wife for doing and thank my wife for doing a lot of the research on the go as well. She was the in-app person, I guess. I was the crowdsourcing and where are we going next, and just optimizing what we can or cannot do. I know on the Disney side, we noticed some differences in the app, but one of the great things was the walking directions that we came across. So we could literally get turn by turn directions on how to get from one spot to the ride, in addition to getting information on the wait times. But that was our journey.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool thing too, and the Disney app is super helpful and useful to kind of have like that one-stop shop for all those different things. I know from my perspective, like I mean, I've been quite a few times to Disney, and this time I went with my son. It was the first time he's been since he was a little kid. He's 10 now, and it's like so funny because you do all this planning, you go like crazy over everything, and like Joe mentioned, it's expensive too. And I took him when he was little, and this time he wanted to go for a couple of days for his spring break, and I'm like, well, what do you want to do? Like what? And he's like, I don't remember anything from last time. It's just like, there's like so much you went through like to be able to like make it happen, and then like all these things running around, like let's get this picture and these things, and then he's just like, I don't remember anything from last time, but once we got there, he started like remembering some stuff, which was good. But yeah, I mean, he was like really focused on like seeing like certain characters that he liked and all these different things. So it was pretty interesting from our planning perspective. We kept it like a little loose, I will say, at this time, because we were just there for 3 days for like a long weekend, and so we're kind of like, let's try and like fit it in, and it was super busy too. I'm sure you saw too. We were there like on the Easter weekend, and yeah, very busy. But I'm curious, like, do you guys think that in a way, I was thinking about this morning, like it's almost like planning for peak in a sense, right? It's like you're trying to like maximize, get as much out of like every single day, and trying to be as efficient as possible. But I'm curious, like as you look at that, and we start to think about, I think you mentioned something about your ops mind kicking in there, Kashifa, about that, and then Joe, I think you had a post about like, I think was it you that posted about like the trash cans, like like the distance between trash cans or something there, all these different things, right? I mean that happened there. So I'm curious, like what are some of like the biggest takeaways that you took from like your trip there from an operations perspective? Because I mean, I look at it, I think it was like, I mean, I put in the title here. I mean, I think it's kind of like almost like a master class in operations, just the way things are run. And there's like always somebody there for every single thing that I think could arise. And it's just like they think of everything almost. I mean, what are some of the biggest takeaways for you there, Joe?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I was there with my in-laws, who my mother-in-law is awesome. She's great. Operationally savvy, not so much. And going through the experience with her, and she will listen to this, which so this is all positive. Going through the experience with her made me realize how operationally good, not just Disney, but all of Orlando, right? Like, Kashif, you mentioned the experience at the airport getting a rental car, right? Yeah. And going to Universal and how Universal handles it, and how they leverage buffering with like the Universal Walk, and like how they move your lines to kind of like figure things out. Like it's the whole experience because of how many people get down there. And I don't think I give them enough credit, because that's how my mind works. And so seeing, like my mother-in-law or my daughter, or, people who don't look at process and don't look at operations and don't approach things like that day to day, like how they experienced it right next to me, really made me understand like, oh, wow, like there's a lot of good things at work here, right? Like I think about crowding, right? Like when you're in a confined space, and this kind of comes back to your peak thing, Kevin, right? Like, you're in a confined space. They're trying to maximize capacity as much as possible and get the most out of what's going on. But everything comes back to like user experience, right? So like my mother-in-law would be like, "Oh my gosh, that was so great! I can't believe they thought of X, Y, and Z." Right? I don't know, like having food right at the entrance to a line, right? Or like a movable food cart that wasn't in front of a ride yesterday when there was no line, and all of a sudden is right next to the end of the line on the day that the line is 3 hours long, right? She's like, I can't believe they thought about that, and I'm like, well, yeah, of course they thought about that. That this helps with X, Y, and Z, right? Like it keeps the person happy as they go wait in the line, and they didn't realize it. And I think that was my biggest takeaway was Disney, the Orlando airport, Universal. We spent time in SeaWorld, right? Like in SeaWorld, everything that they do is with the purpose of an improved customer experience. And the benefit is that the operational change or operational process they put in place, like, is the mechanism to support that, right? They do it with that first, and they do it in every single thing. And so you get this like really consistent performance. You get really impactful like processes or user experiences, like the app and things like that. Like they take a lot of really fundamental and like rudimentary operational topics, like, and they use it to like make your customer experience great, right? It's almost like magic, right? Like you don't know that that's how they did it. And that was pretty long-winded because I was thinking through it as I was going, and I've been listening to the two of you talk as well, and I'm like reliving my time in Orlando, and I'm like, oh, there was this thing, like the Uber line. I remember my wife telling me to shut up because I wouldn't stop talking about how great the Uber line was leaving Universal. like we're here for the shows. You're talking about the Uber line. Yeah, I think that's just what it was. Like I had a really, really, really good experience. And it was because of all the operational things they do. And then it just becomes this like flywheel mechanism for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting too. You talked about kind of the crowd management stuff. That's like one little note I had here was like around the bottleneck management itself. It's like just the way they, kind of, I guess, corral everybody. And you don't necessarily feel like you're being, controlled, I guess, in a sense, like as part of the experience. But if you like step back and look at some of the things, like one of the things I noticed, like in Magic Kingdom, there's like a sweet shop there, and we went there like a couple times and get some dessert and stuff. And I noticed like they kind of break up the line and the wait for you to get that, where you order and then give you a slip and then you walk through, but it's still like part of the experience of going through that. And I think it's pretty interesting how they able to manage that, and it's kind of relatable in a sense to like how you manage like not only like people flow like within an operation, but then like package flow in some cases too. Like how do you break that up so you're not like creating those bottlenecks within your operation or your warehouse to be able to do that. I think it's pretty interesting how they do that, where it's like, you're waiting for potentially a long time, but they kind of break it up in a sense where it's like, oh, well, I've, gotten past like this section of the line and now I'm in this section, and it feels like you're making progress almost in a sense. What do you think, Kashif?
So I would definitely echo what you guys are saying. And I was thinking about my experience here, but for ops-minded folks, I mean, obviously we are one of the crazy ones that look at the fact that there's one line where everybody's going through versus 5 lines, and don't even give the users the choice to pick the most efficient line because theory says one line moves faster, right? So little things like that do jump out. But I think as an ops person, for me, what stood out was that I was being handled as a user in the queue without feeling handled. Right. And that to me was a mark of a very well thought out operation, that it was all about customer delight, customer experience. And I'm sure I'm not the only person that asked for directions from 5 different people.
Yeah.
I can only imagine answering the same question 1,500 times a day and still maintaining a smile. I think that was a real genius of training the people at Disney, and that you are a guest. And as a service provider there, their job was to make me feel welcome. Their job was to make me move through the line without feeling like it was a long line. And the moment I was starting to lose interest or even thinking about, gosh, I've been in this line for too long, some new input or stimulus was provided to me to keep me engaged. Whether it's a turn, whether it's another room where the line zigzags one more time, but it didn't evoke a negative reaction because they thought of that. And I think that's the real genius of the magic that we experience is they're so dialed in on what you will experience or what you're about to experience that they have a valid and well thought out response before you get there. I know, as a side note, one thing that stood out for me was the attention to cuisine and dietary restrictions. One of my children has a dairy allergy, so it was important to find out which restaurants could accommodate that, and that was also something that stood out both at Universal and Disney, that those considerations were accounted for, planned for, etc. And certainly that was really good.
Yeah, and I did see, like, kind of going back to the app that you're talking about there. I mean, I did see that too as well. Like, I noticed this time where we go to like reserved dining, like it has like all those restriction kind of things pointed out and what the options are there, which I think is a really interesting thing. But I mean, it's interesting you talk about, you know, the potential of like how many times has this cast member, as they call them, right, the employees there, I mean, how many times have they gotten this question today? And it was pretty interesting, actually. We were talking, you know, my family, like when we were there, like oh, I wonder, like I think my son asked, he's like, how many people are here right now, like at Disney? I'm like, oh, I don't know. And I looked it up, and it's like on average they see like 57,000 people a day, which is just insane to think about. But, you know, seeing that many people go through, and I think even too, like to your point there about, you know, they're answering the same question over and over. You know, I know we did like the egg hunt through Epcot, like on the Easter weekend. And there was a couple of times where like we couldn't find the egg, so we asked somebody, and it was not only like that they just had like one answer. It was like they had multiple different answers. Like they're like, well, do you want me to tell you exactly where the egg is, or do you want me to give you a hint, right? And it's like, you know, they have like multiple responses prepared, I guess, for like the type of experience that you want to have. But I'm curious, like, how you guys look at that from the perspective of like, how do you almost relate that to like the experience of like an employee in the warehouse? Like, how do you, I guess, on one side, like have them, you know, in the same mindset as like a Disney cast member, but also like in the same mindset of their experience for maybe like someone that's like attending or working within there? I mean, I'm curious what you guys think about that. Like, how do you translate that a little bit into like an operational culture?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I thought about this a lot when we were at Magic Kingdom, because I was thinking a lot about SOPs at that point in time, right? And I was thinking very similarly to Kashif said, of like, this person has had to have gotten so many questions, but at the same time, every time I had a question, someone was right there.
Yeah.
Right. And so there was this, it's very clear that everyone at Disney is well trained, right? And that's known, but there is a process for everything. And that doesn't take away freedom for like that cast member. And within the warehouse, it wouldn't take freedom away from an employee, right? It gives them a framework to work within. Like you said, Kevin, like, okay, I'm going to get a question about eggs. Do I just give them the answer, or do I have some freedom with how I interact, but these are the limits that I have. I can either give you the answer, I can give you a hint, or I can, whatever the third option would be, right? And it's along the same lines where I witnessed a cast member was asked a question. They gave an answer. The person had a follow-up question. That person's role wasn't to know that answer any further. So they knew the next step was, let me get you somewhere where I can get you help that you need, and move them off the path, out of the way, got them this like what felt like one-on-one attention, but really what was the employee doing was saying, I don't know the answer to this question, so I'm gonna get somebody else to help you, right? But that was okay, the person was empowered to do that, right? That was part of the process. And so when I think about that in a warehouse environment, it's, hey, this is a clear definition of what your role is today, right? You are going to be doing this function, and these are the outcomes we want you to do. And if you come across this, this is what you do. If you come across that, this is what you do. If you come across this and you don't know what to do, here's where you go, right? And now that employee knows exactly what to do and what's expected. And that's a much better employee experience because they don't run around feeling like they have no idea what's going on. They don't feel overwhelmed when they keep getting the same question over and over and like they can't execute or help. And so I thought that was something that was really, really impressive. The thing that triggered that for me, like I said, was, every time I had a question, someone was exactly where I needed them to be, which is also like good use of data and planning. Like these are the spots where people usually stop to be like, do I take a left or a right? So let's put someone there that can answer a question. But also we were in a store in Magic Kingdom that had sold ornaments, right? You're at a place with a bunch of people, a bunch of kids. It's a store that has only breakable items in it, right? So obviously you need a process for what happens when something falls and breaks. There was a kid that just turned around, had a backpack on, and knocked down a couple ornaments. Immediately, 3 people stepped right into the middle. One person took the kid and said, like, hey, let's step over here, like, whatever, took their mind off of it. So they weren't thinking about, oh, I just broke this or whatever. One other person cleaned it up. And then one other person just made sure nobody else walked over that way. Right. And the immediacy in which an exception happened and then there was a response that was like a full response was the like, oh, okay. There's clearly a process in SOP. Everyone knew what to do because basically it was like everyone went to a station.
Yeah.
And like, that was a really, really unique employee experience and a unique customer experience. And I think that's super impactful. I think that's like really translatable, right? Like some people think process makes it too rigid, but process can like unlock a ton when done effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's such a great example too. You're talking about the ornaments there because it's like it for them to like step into that formation, I guess almost is what you could call it. Like, I mean, it's not that's not something that's like they just randomly said like, oh, let's, get in this position, right? I mean, it's definitely something that was trained like to be able to do that. And I think it's so important too to call out, like you said, even that somebody didn't know the answer, like they were still determined like to get you the answer. I mean, you think about sometimes where maybe you go to like a store and you have a question for somebody in like a big store, like one department, they're just like, oh, I don't work in that department, like you're gonna have to go over to that department. Right there, it's like because I had a similar experience too. Going back to the eggs, actually, that was a big focus of our trip, if you couldn't tell, was this egg hunt, trying to find all the eggs in Epcot. But we were struggling to find one of the eggs there, and we had sat down to take a little break, and we were sitting there, and just like one guy that worked there, he kind of came out from behind the scenes sort of, and we're just like, oh, do you have any idea? And he is like, oh, he's like, I'm sorry, like I don't work in this country there in Epcot in this area, so I'm not quite sure. But he was like determined. I could tell, even though he seemed like he was I don't know, the way he was like dressed in his like the shirt that he was wearing seemed like that he maybe was at like a higher level. But even though it seemed like he was on a mission, that he was like on the way to go do something, he was like still willing to like drop everything and be like, oh, let's find you like somebody that can help you and get you that answer and everything. And I think like having that mindset in like an operation in a warehouse fulfillment center, for example, I mean, I think is a great thing, even from like a leadership perspective. If you have somebody that comes up to you and you're a supervisor, your manager for like inbound, for example, and then somebody asks you about a question, you're like, well, I'm not really sure, because that's like an outbound, that's an inventory control thing or something, like, so you should just talk to them instead. Like, trying to make sure that employee like finds the answer, I think is very relatable to like that visitor attendee experience, because you don't want your employee to just feel like I'm not going to go all the way around trying to figure out this answer, or just be like frustrated and give up, and instead of like getting the answer, just maybe guessing and doing the wrong thing. So I mean, I think that's really like an interesting thing there. What do you think about that, Kashif?
I have a lot of respect for McDonald's and Disney as two organizations that have really mastered SOPs and training. But I think Disney has more of a deeper understanding of the guest experience, right? The fact that it's about delivering joy and having operations so tightly baked into the delivery of joy. From a warehouse 3PL perspective, I mean, we have two functions, right? We have the account managers that are outward facing, interacting with the brands on behalf of their customers that have an address change request or a ship method change, or, oh, I placed this item order incorrectly. That I think requires a deeper level or a more nuanced or more careful handling of the conversation. And then you have the warehouse floor team, which is essentially it's a feeder into, they're looking at a screen, they're looking at a mobile device, looking at what orders need to be picked. They're a layer removed, but I think the same mindset can apply to empowering the people in whether externally facing roles or internally facing roles to manage exceptions with a smile and manage exceptions with the sense of empowerment. So we have gotten great feedback from our inbound team, for example, when the customer communicated information a certain way, but the actual, when you open the container doors or the box, the contents of that box do not meet what our expectation was. And empowering the team to either create a ticket, run to the front office, or to get on the phone with the customer and say, look, you told us this item would be folded or barcoded, et cetera, and the customer was told by their supplier that they would do that. It comes down to exception management and removing any barriers from someone raising their hand and saying, we need help. And this is not what we expected. What would you like us to do? Now, in an account management function, while we have cutoffs for rush orders and things that need to go out by the same day, we routinely break them in order to curry favor with customers and to add to our goodwill bank, because mistakes happen and you want to make sure you can withdraw from your goodwill bank. And I think the ratio is like one bad deed will cost you about 12 good deeds. So we want to make sure that we take care of our customers, because any opportunity to go above and beyond keeps them as a customer for the very long term. And I think the opportunity to shine is always when things go wrong, when things go sideways. So if we have a culture of, it's okay to ask a question, it's okay to say, this smells funny, this smells weird, can we do it this way? Because that's where a lot of innovation comes from. And it could be your receivers, it could be your pickers, it could be your order packers, it could be someone that takes a suggestion because they're touching the product every day, they're in the operation. But at the same time, if the account management function that's external facing leads with kindness, leads with grace, your customers are going to be with you for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's such a great takeaway there too, and I think I'd be like really curious to see, like, you know, as a Disney cast member, like what is their, like, okay, these are the things like you need to accomplish today, right? And then it's like, well, what happens if, you know, they get so tied up with, you know, having, like you said, like you have one customer and then you step outside of your regular process because, or like your regular cutoff times, whatever the case may be, to make sure that, like, oh, this customer has something special going on. Like, let's make sure this happens for the customer. In the same regard, like at Disney, I'm sure, like, you know, some of the cast members, employees, like, okay, like, you know, they're supposed to do these things today, get these things done, and then it's like, well, you know, they have a visitor that's, you know, needs some special attention, and they have a problem with this, and they have to solve that problem. And now, like, I'm curious, like, how do they handle that, or how do they, like, you know, manage like those routine things? Like, do they have a process that, like, okay, this gets handed off to somebody else now? I'd be very curious, like, to see what that looks like. But I'm curious, I mean, from both your perspectives, like, when you look at, you know, I think we kind of mentioned in here, you know, it's like little things like that are going on that we're kind of like nerding out about. I think you said, like, your family was like, why are you worried about this? Like, you know, we're into, like, for the magic, or to have fun, right? And I'm curious, like, what are some of those, like, little tiny things that you saw there, like, that kind of stuck out to you, and you're like, oh, this is really cool. Like, this is something I could use in the future or put in place. I know for me, like, one thing, I was at where was I? It was one of the food places, the like Tex-Mex place in Magic Kingdom there. I think it's like Paco Bills or something like that. And we were there eating lunch, and then I went to throw some stuff away, and I saw they had like this really interesting like dustpan broom holder like mount on the wall there. Like it's very like kind of discreet, like you wouldn't really notice it if you're just passing by, but it was there, and it was like kind of like making sure that like, okay, there's always like a broom and dustpan like close to the trash can. And I was like really observing it, like taking a look at my son's like, Dad, what are you looking at? I'm like, oh, this is a really cool like holder for a broom. And he's like, come on, let's go. Like, what, what are we doing? So, I mean, I'm curious, like for both of you, I mean, like what kind of little things like stuck out to you like that, where you're like, oh, this is like a cool, like little thing they're doing that's, you know, probably to like a normal person is not necessarily stands out, but like does like make a difference in like that overall process.
Kevin, you alluded to it earlier, and it's not, I did not get it from this trip. I got it from a different thing, but I was very mindful of it when I went on this trip, right? We talked about how Disney and theme parks in general, anyone in hospitality, right? They're trying to put the customer experience or the guest experience first, but they also are trying to set themselves up to succeed. Like human nature is human nature. You drive down the road, there's trash everywhere. Well, if you're going to have a bunch of people with different levels of decorum and expectations about what is cleanliness or not cleanliness, or what is acceptable or not acceptable in one place, how do you control for that so that you can control for the experience? And one of those is cleanliness, right? Is, as you know, they're also a business. They're also trying to stay profitable. Right. So the less people that they have working in things like janitorial capacity or support capacity, then the better off they can focus that resource elsewhere. So how do they keep it clean? Well, there are a ton of trash cans. They do a great job of hiding them. You don't really realize how many trash cans there are, but you can't really go more than a couple steps like without a trash can. So they incentivize you to throw something out because it's harder for you to throw it on the ground than it is to just put it in a trash can. Right. At the same time, you don't want gum on handrails and on tables and falling off and on the ground on the path, because that, you know, it becomes a defect in the experience. It becomes a janitorial. You got people who are upset they got gum on their shoes. So what do? They just don't sell gum. But like, did you realize when you were there that they didn't have gum?
I was just gonna say I didn't even notice that or realize that.
Oh, yeah. No, they don't, right? And like when you get food, they like make it hard for you to leave that area with food. Not because they make it hard to leave the area, but they make it easy to be like, oh, well, we'll just sit down quick. Yeah. Because there's enough seating, right? And if you are at a park that you walk away from, very rarely are there a lot of like extra stuff that you like can put down and blow around, right? And so like it's minor things like that where we have a high expectation of what we want this experience to be like and what we want our facility to look like. And we're at the mercy of other people to follow those rules that we may or may not be able to enforce. So how do we set ourselves up best to succeed? And I think there's like a lot of examples of that. And you alluded to one of them, right? Like they don't lose time because people aren't walking around looking for tools, but they also aren't causing a bad experience because there aren't people that are responsible for janitorial services walking around with giant carts of trash in the middle of summer where it stinks because of the heat, and you got brooms that are hitting people and whatever because they just put the tools close to where the messes happen or the problems happen. So like it's easy to fix things quickly. I think those are two of the big takeaways for me of like what they do well that they probably don't get enough credit for that are transferable to any operation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the cleanliness is such a big thing. You know, you think about like how many people go through there in a day, and the fact that like, because I was looking around and you know I was thinking about your post about the trash cans while I was there this time, and I'm like, I'm like, man, it's crazy to think just how many people are like walking through this area, and like you literally do not see like anything, not even like a small thing like on the ground. Like, yes, like every once in a while here and there, like, you know, maybe there's a little piece of paper or something like that, but you would expect it to just be so much more. I mean, like you said, like you know, you drive down the road and, you know, you see trash like all along the side of the road, right? So we know that like, you know, there's tons of traffic and tons of people. Like, people have a tendency to just drop trash or throw it somewhere because there's not a trash can. But like putting all those things like in reach, I think is really, I mean, it's really relatable to, I think, what you would see when you go into a warehouse that is like really clean and is organized, because you see that like, okay, there's lots of options here where, you know, people have the option to throw something out at the end of this aisle, the end of that aisle. Like, you know, there's not like, I'm just gonna like throw this paper like in between this pallet because there's not really a trash can like close by, or I don't have like something on my forklift where I could just stuff some trash real quick. So what about on your side, Kashif?
So it's interesting, as you're tying this to the warehouse, one of the interview tactics that I use is either myself or one of my team members would literally drop the backing of a 4x6 label, or like that paper, right? Crinkle something and throw it in the middle of the aisle. And as I'm walking the floor with a candidate, if they stop, first of all, if they notice it, that's an important plus sign. But if they actually pick it up and find the nearest trash can, which we do have strategically placed, but if that exception bothers them, we know they're the right fit, right? So we're looking for folks that have a tendency of just looking out for exceptions and then doing something about it and feeling empowered to do that. So that's the right attitude for us. Now, bringing this back to what we saw there, I think everything was set up around a positive experience for the visitor to Disney, right? Which means the parallel for me in that regard is any interaction with our company or the logistics function or the 3PL should be an opportunity to delight the person who's asking the question, whether they're external, a brand reaching in, or whether it's internal, a team member that has feedback or has a question, etc. It is about the spirit of service, the spirit of, I wanted to say the two words that keep coming to mind are feeling heard, right? So whether it was asking the same question 19 times from all the different people, and I mean 57,000 people a day is no small amount, and I'm sure that question is repeated. Yeah. But if the understanding is embedded in the folks that are working there and internally, that we are here to serve, we're here to delight, and the first step in making someone feel appreciated and understood is just listening to them, just feeling heard. And I think that goes a long way in calming a situation down, or taking somebody who's about to have a negative experience and just listening to them. So that stood out to me. The other thing that I was noticing was, and I don't know if you guys felt this as well, but I felt they had generalists as well as specialists. So the person that was responsible for the China section in Epcot may not be as well versed in the Italy section, right? Yeah. But they felt empowered to direct you to the right person and give you the direction, or either walk you personally to connect you with their counterpart in that region. So I think a lot of the excellence in service and the experience came from folks being exceptional in their well-defined function. So they became specialists. But you also had generalists floating around that maybe either graduated from one department or were trained as generalists that were not exactly in one particular section of the park, but more traffic flow, more general questions. How do I catch a ride from Magic Kingdom to Epcot, right? So those are more general questions. So I felt that having subject matter experts was as valuable as having generalists, but they may not be the same person. And that was okay.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. And now that you're saying that, like, I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, like they definitely have that kind of like structure, it seems like. Because even and I think they kind of almost like, you know, subconsciously train you a little bit, right? Because they do have like, I forget what they were called, but I noticed like this time, like they had like these little kind of guest experience or guest relationship, like little kiosks, like every so often in the parks. And I think like that's kind of like, you know, they were able to direct you to, like, no matter where you were, like kind of like direct you in the right way to go and things like that. And then you see kind of like a differentiation in the cast member, you know, aside from like being in different lands or countries or worlds, kingdoms, whatever, whatever the case may be there. Aside from like those differentiating type of uniforms and or costumes, whatever you want to call them, like you do see like there are people floating around that are in like a certain type of costume that it's like, oh, like, I think your mind gets kind of used to that, and you're like, oh, this is a person like I could go to for anything, which I think is pretty interesting there, almost like the subject matter expert, I guess, in a sense there. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. So I guess let's go around and say like, what was the number one top takeaway for you? Something like you took away and you're like, oh, I'm going to try and figure out a way to implement this in the future in something I do.
I'll go first.
All
So
right.
I know where my kids are going to be working for a summer job. And I thought it was Chick-fil-A because they also have a great operation.
Yeah, that's true.
Wegmans has a great operation, like to your point about the broom. It's broom number 34 that's hanging on the wall. But I think it would be much easier to convince them to get a job at Disney with discounts, etc. But what's the best way to learn truly what a team member goes through and impart that on our future generation? I think sending the kids to Disney to learn the Disney way, if only to understand the spirit of service, because I think no one does it better than Disney. So if they can understand that customer facing, how to deliver joy, how to deliver delight, and do so humbly, I think that would be my number one takeaway from this.
Very nice. What about you, Joe?
Expectation management, like the power of expectation management in a world in which we want everything immediately and as fast as possible, and things can deliver in an hour, right? Like we all pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to go stand in line for 3 hours to ride a roller coaster for 10 minutes, and we all smile about it because Disney does a really good job of setting expectations. They do a great job of setting expectations for their customers, but they also do a really good job of setting expectations for the employees. And we've talked about it a ton, but like their employees know that the job isn't to answer the question, it's to get the person an answer. So whether that's you or someone else, your job is to get them what they need to get. And so I think Disney is a masterclass on expectation management, both internally and externally. And I think that's part of what makes their experience so good, even if it's not the fastest or the cheapest or whatever, right? You know what you're getting and you know the updates along the way.
Yeah, I think that's a good one too. So very interesting takeaways from you both there. And I would say my number one takeaway there, I think certainly was like to kind of similar to what you're saying there, Joe. I mean, is to really ensure that like, no matter what, like I guess if we relate the visitor at Disney to the employee in the operation, to make sure that employee is getting their answer and getting their question answered, because I think that goes a long way in trying to create a good experience for them, and just overall ensuring like, that they want to continue there as well, right? Like, I mean, you go to Disney and you have a magical experience, I guess, as they say, right? And you want to go back, right? And then you have kids and you want to take your kids, and then you're a grandparent and you want to take your grandkids, and then like it's like a generational building kind of thing. And I think if you look at that from creating an employee experience, right, you want your employees to feel like they want to keep coming back in that sense. And not necessarily saying they're going to have a magical experience picking orders, right? But at least having experience where they want to keep coming back, and also then, it kind of gives you that word of mouth too, that like, hey, this is a good place to work. I mean, it's great marketing for employee recruitment and retention as well. So being able to create that experience and getting, questions just answered, I think goes a long way. So very interesting stuff with you both here today. A little fun to talk about Disney here and have some fun around that. As we wrap up here, Joe, how can people get in touch with you? What's the best way to learn more about 1248?
Best way to do it is find me on LinkedIn. I'm less active as of late, but I'm very active there, and that's the quickest way to get a response from me. Not to be a broken record the last 3 times I've talked with you, but I do have a website, www.twelve48.co.
All right, cool. And Kashif, how about you?
LinkedIn as well. There's a link to WhatsApp me right under my profile. Send me a message 24/7, and happy to talk tech, fulfillment, operations, and values. Happy to talk with anyone about that.
All right, great. And thank you both. And I will say that both of them are always open and willing to help and have a conversation around some challenges that you might be having in operations or otherwise. So definitely they say reach out to them, and they mean that 100%. So definitely check them out, connect with them here on LinkedIn. And thank you both for joining me today. And if you want to hear more from The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from The New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for The New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.